Eliza and Sebastian first slept together at a graduation party, when she and Simon had just started dating. Simon had had too much to drink that night, and a couple of hours after the party started, he was peacefully asleep in one of the rooms. And it was at that time that his best friend and his girlfriend were overcome by an unexpected passion. After what they had done, they both realized what they had done and promised not to remember it in the future and to keep it a secret, especially from Simon. The girl did just that. She erased that night from her life and memory, but Sebastian was not very good at it. He kept reminding her of it, trying to seduce her again. But Eliza held firm, constantly reminding the hapless lover that Simon was actually his friend. One day, several years later, he still managed to persuade Eliza to repeat that experience, after which Sebastian went to serve in the army and stayed there for several more years on contract. The girl breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that Sebastian would settle down somewhere else and never show up in her and Simon's life again. A year later, the young people finally tied the knot of marriage, and soon after, Eliza showed her husband a test with 2 bright pink stripes. 9 months later, Simon was holding a pretty baby girl who looked just like him. The man kept saying that his best friend wasn't involved in the important events in his life. Sebastian couldn't get away from the service for the wedding and was now missing the birth of his friend's daughter. Sure, they continued to keep in touch by phone calls and texts, but Simon missed the live interaction. Sebastian came back into the couple's life suddenly. One day he showed up on their doorstep and announced that his service was over and he was back in town. Simon was overjoyed, but Eliza was saddened by the news. The fact that Sebastian had matured during the service added to his frustration. His figure had become more trim. There was a relief that was visible in the outline under his shirt. Involuntarily, she glanced at her former lover as he took off his jacket. Sebastian noticed her gaze, though he didn't show it. Now the fear that her friend had inadvertently blabbed to her husband about their affair was even greater. When he and his company went out for a party, the woman could not sleep until her husband came home, and she knew that all was well. She was nervous, because everyone knows the simple truth that what goes on a sober person's mind goes on a drunken person's tongue. And Sebastian seemed to be trying to make up for lost time. He kept hanging around Simon and Eliza's house, constantly asking Simon to sit and talk, trying to help his ex-mistress with the baby. In fact, what Eliza didn't trust in this situation was herself. She knew that she had cheated on her husband twice with this man for a reason, and she still felt attracted to him, though she strenuously denied it in herself. Intimacy with her former lover had been so often dreamed of at night since his return that it began to drive the woman crazy. Simon noticed that his wife had become nervous and tense. Eliza was snapping at him over little things, getting angry at her daughter, even though she was still very young. The man thought the whole thing was that the active, sociable wife just tired in the maternity leave, and all the pressure of everyday life on it. After work, he tried his best to relieve his beloved from her worries, took her daughter for a walk or a trip to visit his parents. But so far, none of this has helped. All of her husband's good deeds made Eliza feel worse. She blamed herself for thinking of another man. After all, her spouse was such a good man, taking care of their family and herself. Sebastian molested his friend's wife several times when the friend wasn't looking. He clamped his former mistress in a corner, touching her and trying to kiss her. So far, the woman had managed to pull herself successfully out of his clinging hands, but her whole being screamed and prayed that she would let Sebastian continue. "Stop it," she hissed in his ear, trying to throw his hands off her hips. "Have you lost your head at all?" "Yes, out of love for you." He smiled back at her. "I'll tell my husband everything that you stop. And I that we have done it more than once," said Sebastian. Who do you think he would believe? Eliza knew that arguing in this situation was pointless. What to expect from Sebastian, she did not know. After all, he really could ruin her marriage. With just a few words spoken to her husband, they made love on Simon's 30th birthday. He, like in his student days, could not drink, and again after a few hours of celebration slept and had his 10th dream. On this day, Eliza was liberated. She rented a house in the country, invited many friends and her husband. Eliza set a fancy table. There were so many people that not everyone could fit at the table. It was noisy, fun, and Simon had too much to drink for joy. Sebastian didn't miss a moment and accosted Eliza as soon as she left the room where she had put her husband to bed. The woman let her guard down. She drank too much, it went to her head, and she gave herself to her former lover without much resistance. The next day, she saw Sebastian smoking on the porch. He tried to stop her, grabbing her arms, but Eliza lashed out. Once again, she blamed herself for what she had done and for her weak will. "Yes, stop. You were fine," said the man angrily. "Let go. It was all a mistake. Let's forget it, please." She looked at him with a look of despair. "Why do you insist? You liked everything." "Simon wasn't that good in bed," he chuckled. Eliza tugged her hand once more and finally managed to free it. But as soon as they both turned around, they saw Simon standing in the doorway. It was immediately clear from his face that he had heard everything and, of course, understood everything. The man was so angry, but he didn't realize who it was anymore. With a prolonged yell, he threw his fists at his friend and threw him into the snow. A fight ensued in which Sebastian, with his hand-to-hand combat skills, was obviously winning. Simon was possessed by anger, and he struck without discernment. The men pulled them apart, though the brawlers continued to shout nasty things at each other and tried to get out of the hands of the rescuers. Simon had already switched to his wife. There were angry tears in his eyes that made Eliza's heart squeeze. She knew how much her spouse loved her, and yet she still allowed herself to do this to him. In that moment, she hated herself more than anyone else. At first, Simon wanted to go immediately to the apartment and throw all the things of his unfaithful wife out the window, but a colleague advised him not to. After all, Eliza had a trump card up her sleeve, their daughter, with whom she could easily forbid her father to see her. Simon reasoned that it was a sensible idea and tried to calm down. But he filed for divorce as soon as possible. But Eliza did not think to forbid her husband to see his daughter. She was so ashamed of her behavior, of the pain she had caused Simon, that she would not have dared to do it. She begged him endlessly to forgive her, but Simon was adamant. The double betrayal, and in front of all his friends, offended him greatly. He simply could not forgive his wife for this. Of course, he broke off communication with Sebastian as well. So did his ex-wife. The woman went back to her parents' house to go out to work. The baby had to be taken care of by someone. They, of course, condemned their daughter for such an act, but did not refuse to help. For a long time, she could not build her personal life. All the men that she met on her way turned out to be scoundrels. Often, coming home, tired after work, she put her daughter to bed, and then cried bitterly, burying her face in the pillow.